Hi, everyone. We are going to continue our discussion of the elements of art today. And let me just click up to our screen sharing. And we'll start off with this slide just because I love this painting. This is Veronese. It's called The Wedding at Cana, a great painting. We might look at this later. We might write this one down. But this is a great example of color use and a color harmony that we'll see later on. And this painting again that we've seen before, and I want to make sure you've got written down. And this one as well, if you'll remember, Mondrian, Broadway Boogie Woogie, oil on canvas, 1943. So let's look at space. And space is a big category. It's really indefinable, and we can think of it as this general receptacle of all things. You guys know what space is. It's all the air around you. And we refer to this in the visual arts as the spatial arts, because most of these art forms are organized in space. Even if it's two-dimensional space, like on a canvas, it's still space. Whereas you might call music a temporal art because music is organized in time. Maybe film, video, and dance form is organized by both time and space. So that's something to keep in mind, of course. And we've got that positive and negative space, positive and negative shapes that kind of cross over with one another. And we've seen these slides before where we're talking about positive and negative shapes and space. So we can use the terms interchangeably when we're discussing those areas. And architects are particularly concerned with space. Um, we experience the outside of a building as a building that has mass, is essentially an object, whereas when we're looking at the inside of a building, we see it as a volume and as a sequence of enclosed spaces. It's like from the outside, it's a thing. From the inside, we're seeing the inside of the thing. There are several ways that we get to the illusion of space on a two-dimensional surface. And a lot of ancient Egypt paintings have little or no depth, and so the images appear to sit flat on the picture plane. And picture plane just means like what's up front at your eyes. So not really a lot of depth into the image, not really like a window, but more like a flat picture. We usually see profile views, and objects are depicted from their most recognizable, identifiable viewpoints. Now, that's not to say there are no illusions of space, because we see overlapping happening a lot in Egyptian art. Um, so there are these devices that you can use to create the illusion of space. There is that overlapping I mentioned. There's diminishing size. So that's where objects get smaller the further they are away from you. There's vertical placement, and this is when objects appear to be closer when they're low down in the painting. Objects that are high appear to be further away. When we overlap, we've got placement and we've got diminishing size, we get a more rounded sense of space and depth. See? Diminishing size, also called foreshortening. Things close to us are larger, things far from us are smaller. We've got overlap happening there. We've got overlap and diminishing size happening here. Here we've got foreshortening, so that's vertical placement. So this object that's low and large, so vertical placement, in this composition is interpreted as being close. Also note atmospheric perspective, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Things that are high are interpreted as feeling distant. Here's another great example of vertical placement, but for some reason I really don't like this painting, but it's a good example of the effect. And you can see that things that are far are placed up high, things that are near are placed down low. We've kind of got everything happening here. Diminishing size, placement, overlapping, kind of everything all at once. And pretty much everything that's naturalistic in terms of its style is going to have all three of these things happening at once. So I mentioned atmospheric perspective, and that's this illusion created by sort of the crispness and the blurriness of objects in space. So it also involves color. So warmer colors will tend to advance and cooler colors will tend to recede. So you can see like the faces of the figures in this painting are warmer in feel, whereas the blue gray in the background is a lot cooler in feeling. Um, there's a lot more contrast in the foreground, whereas back behind there are more grays happening. Less contrast in the distance. We've got really sharp edges in the foreground, and again, back where those mountains are, it's really kind of blurred. And this is just the way our eyes work, right? When we see something up close, it's very crisp. When we see something far away, it's not so crisp. A lot of times watercolors are a really good way to examine this effect. It's a really apt medium for showing atmospheric perspective. And if you look particularly down at the slide on the bottom, the image on the bottom, you can see that the arch and the wall there are very crisp, but the turret in the far background is a lot blurrier. The colors are grayer, the edges are not as crisp. This is from my colleague Victor Sandblom. The figure up close is very crisp, relatively crisp, compared to the rest of the background, which is all sort of blurred together. So that makes the figure appear closer, even with the placement on the paper. Or the fence sits up closer, it's lower down. It's got a little more contrast and definition compared to the background. The trees very far away are just gray, where the middle ground trees are greener. The hill close to us is more defined, while the hills in the back are much less defined. We've got kind of everything in this one happening as well. We've got a really good sense of the atmospheric perspective. We've got the overlapping, diminishing size, kind of everything happening here. Placement as well. So we need to talk about linear perspective because this is how you really make things feel real and have very accurate depth and dimension. So these are examples of one point perspective. And what that means is there is one disappearing point. So that means that all of the buildings in this image are all appearing to disappear back to one point. And and you can see this with something like railroad tracks, this effect called convergence, where when you look down railroad tracks, they appear to come together at an angle rather than appearing to be flat like a ladder. So we see the points, the rails converging upon one another because our eyes can only focus on one point off in the distance at a time. On the other hand, this is two-point perspective. So we're seeing a viewpoint going off to the right, and then we're also seeing a viewpoint going off to the left, almost like we could turn the corner here and go off to the left as well as go to the right. Teaches us how to draw objects in order to create the appearance of volumetric space. This is a really great example. See the arch sort of mid-ground up on the ceiling? And then we follow back to the arch in the mid-background, and that arch is smaller. So not only is there diminishing size, but all the angles comport with the disappearing point. Raphael painting you've probably seen. So this sort of demystifies the space. We create that naturalistic volume. It's a really valuable resource, obviously, for drawing images from observation or from imagination. It's objective. So compared to a lot of other stuff that we see in art, which would be subjective, there's a right and wrong. So it's geometric. It's mathematical essentially. There's a correct answer, and then there's a wrong answer. It either looks right or it doesn't look right. And so we would say perspective is probably the most important thing that came out of the Renaissance in terms of graphical geometric use of art materials. Um, Art previously appeared quite flat and unrealistic, and that's because this technique had not yet been discovered. So let's look at basic perspective. That point of view or cone of vision or disappearing point, that's where your eyes are in relation to the world. It's this conical view we've got out from the center of our heads. That's how we see the world, right? So we've got what's straight in front of us, and then we've got our peripheral vision. The picture plane I mentioned before, so that's what is flat up against our eyes. So a two-dimensional object like a drawing, we can think of the flat surface as the picture plane. Horizon line, that's when you're looking out and you see the horizon, like when you're looking out at the ocean, you see a flat line straight across, that's a horizon line. Above that, you have a ground plane. Below that, or above that, you have a sky plane. Below that, you have a ground plane. Eye level is your relationship with the horizon line. So if you're standing on that beach and you squat down, your eye level changes in relation to the horizon line. That vanishing point again, so that's where you see all parallel lines meeting or vanishing as they recede into the distance. This is the point on the horizon you establish or fix your gaze at in order to logically and realistically depict objects. We can have a center vanishing point, so straight ahead of you. We could have a non-central vanishing point. So over here, this would cause the viewer to look towards one side or another into the picture. Um, yeah, that would be the same as a left and right vanishing point. We've got zenith and nadir. These are when you would be doing something like 3-point perspective. And this is when you're like looking at a skyscraper from ground level. You're gonna see from the edge of the skyscraper, from that corner, you're gonna see off to the right, off to the left, like the slide we saw of the building and the streets. And then when you look up, at the zenith, that would be the disappearing point up in the sky, we also see lines converge. And nadir would be as if you're floating up in a hot air balloon and you look down upon buildings. We also see a vanishing point that all the buildings and all those edges come down to. We've gone over all this stuff. Except down at the bottom, orthogonal lines. And these are temporary lines that we'll see in a few minutes that we draw in order to figure out where the lines need to happen in order to make something go with perspective. You would draw those lightly because you'll want to erase them later. So we'll see that objects appear to grow smaller. Objects appear larger close to us. These are of courses. All level, horizontal, parallel lines that are above or below the horizon line shrink as they recede into the distance. Vertical lines in one point and two perspective will always be parallel to the sides of the picture plane. So this means unless we are drawing that skyscraper, everything that is straight up and down stays straight up and down. It's those tops of cubes, say, that bend to go along with the perspective lines. If you want to go along with these slides, you can. It's pretty instructive. So this is a basic 1 point, one vanishing point drawing. We establish the horizon line like this. We've got that sky plane up above, the ground plane below, and then a central vanishing point, just put right in the middle of the page. We put it to the right or to the left, it would be a non-central vanishing point. Drawing a rectangle around that central vanishing point. So what we're going to do is draw the inside of a box, essentially. We're going to draw a room, basically. And so this will become the back wall of that room. And here's how you would draw the floor, wall, and ceiling of this room. All of these lines match up with that vanishing point. This is what I mentioned before. They're all converging upon that vanishing point. And you see those dashed lines, those are those orthogonals that I mentioned before. So they're just drawn in there to tell us where things will line up. And you would erase those later, like such. So you can see that this drawing evolves into this drawing just by erasing those orthogonal lines. And you can see that the horizon line has also been erased because we don't need that anymore now that we've got our vanishing point established. If we look at that window, you can see it follows those same type of orthogonals as the top of the wall. That's because it's essentially the same thing. It's a flat object against that wall, so it has to line up in the same way that the rest of the angles lined up in making the wall. But when we're looking head on and we're drawing a door, it's just going to be a flat rectangle, right? It doesn't need to bend or anything to agree with the rest of the drawing. It's just a flat rectangle against a flat wall that we're staring directly at. We can draw in a very uncomfortable couch, really. A concrete couch is what this looks like. This gets a little more complex, but you can see all of the sort of steps that make up the near side of the couch are just perpendicular lines. So they operate in sort of the same way as the door. We're looking straight at them. But it's all the lines that make up the corners and the edges of the couch that have to agree with that vanishing point. And here, see we can still see the crease, the bottom of where the wall meets the floor. If we erase that out and put in the crease where the back of the couch meets the cushion of the couch, we get something like this. And you can see how this looks like it fits into the room. We can put a cylinder in. And so if we're looking at a cylinder head on, what we see is a circle. But then its sides have to match up with the way that the vanishing point works. Again, it's on the side wall. We're not looking straight at it. It's a tube that we're seeing from an angle. So its edges have to match up with the way everything else matched up. We can then erase out the lines that were behind it. And we've got this ductwork up on the ceiling. So this is a little bit more difficult. This is drawing a table. And the difficult thing about this is showing a skewed oval. So if we look at an oval that has to be in perspective, we can't just have it be a flat, perfect oval, right? Because the part that is up close to us is going to be bigger with diminishing size, and the part that's further away from us is going to be smaller. So it has to squash in towards the rear. And the way that you start to draw this is you draw a box first, and then you use these cross lines that I've got up on top of the box to figure out how your angles and your arcs have to work to make this look convincing. So here we've got everything established, and this is a super basic drawing, but everything is established here, and everything works with the center vanishing point. And we can see some examples of simple shapes in student work like this. You can do this with any sort of shape. We can put the depth of objects on any sort of shape. And we show that diminishing size and the correct orientation and the volume of each of these shapes. You can take this really far. If you add in shading and all sorts of sort of decoration, you can really make a very convincing drawing. I particularly like over on the left where the cat is looking out the window and you can see a tree outside. That's really convincing too. But she took a lot of risks in putting this cat trail, this catwalk up and through the room. And she even shows diminishing size with that stair coming down from the catwalk where these steps are larger, closer, even though they're in mid-ground, all the way into background where the steps are smaller. Really cool little drawing. And you can imagine making this couch. What you would do would be to draw it with cubes and rectangles first, and then just like the way that we did the oval table, you can draw in and sketch in things as long as they match up with the perspective of the whole room. This is an example of two-point perspective. And here again, we feel like we could walk off to the left, and you can even see a little vanishing point on the far left side of the horizon line. And we feel like we could walk off to the right. There's a vanishing point clear over at the end of the fence on the right. Pretty good building. Another 2-point. This one's fantastical. Again, another student work. They really went far on this. Really cool drawing. A lot of work. Some sort of abstract architecture going on here. Really taking some risks by twisting and turning some of the lines. That ladder down in the right-hand corner is very convincing. See that? See how straightforward this illusion of space is? Is this the total opposite kind of message here? Okay, we're gonna skip color for now and we'll look at texture because it's pretty straightforward. We'll do color in the next slideshow. Texture. So there are two types of texture, kind of like mass. There's real texture and there's simulated texture. So when we look at something that is real texture, this Anselm Kiefer work has real texture. Um, it is an actual thing, right? You could go up and touch this and actually feel the objects. It's real. It's right there in space in front of you, three-dimensional. I want you to watch this video from the beginning up to about 7:45. It's really excellent, and you can get a sense of what his work is like, an understanding of what he's doing in his work. So obviously, you could go to this video from the PDF that I'll link in with all of these videos. So watch that for sure. And then on the other hand, we've got simulated texture. So this is the appearance of texture depicted through technical means on a two-dimensional surface, usually on a two-dimensional surface, because certainly have a painted sculpture. But you can see in this drawing, it's actually a Van Gogh drawing, and you can see in this painting, we've got a sense of texture, but we know we can't actually touch the thing and feel texture. So on the right, where we can see this feather coat or fur coat or whatever, it's a depiction of texture. It's simulated. So we know we can't touch it, but we can see that it's supposed to be texture. Look at this. This is surrealist, Merritt Oppenheim. She was playing with the idea of texture and animal skin contradicting, an everyday object like a teacup. But this is real texture, actual texture. You could go out and touch it. Simulated texture. You can't feel the texture. You would just feel a flat surface of a painting. Okay, so next lecture will be color. Tune in for that.